Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this GSA webinar on handling COVID-19. Thank you very much for joining us at very stressful times. Debbie, slide down, please. We at the GSA are really focused and committed to best practice in strategic sourcing. For those of you that don't know us, we're an industry association and professional body dedicated to best practice in strategic sourcing around the world. And we represent the interests of both the buyers and the service providers. So this slide shows a range of the services that the GSA offers. I'm not going to go into detail on that because we've only got an hour to get through a huge amount of material today. So we help our members add value through strategic sourcing, and we help them and guide them even in these most stressful of times. So obviously we've seen a lot going on within our membership community. A lot of our member companies have been really grappling with getting through business continuity and disaster recovery. A lot of our members have been turning significantly to their partner portfolios to help them get through at this really, really difficult time in a truly collaborative fashion, which has been really great and warming to see. Other situations not been quite so positive, as companies have been looking at how they trigger force majeure, companies looking at how they go into furloughing. Some companies have done some really, really astounding great stuff. Other companies and other individuals perhaps have been losing a little bit of their moral compasses during this really, really difficult time. So what we wanted to do was actually pull together a webinar which actually looked at a couple of, well, 5 really key issues we see our members grappling with at the moment. So, so we're going to do a top level 10-minute quick fire presentation on each of those subjects, but we do want you to post questions. We do want you to actually put requests on any subjects you'd like the GSA to dig into much deeper, the ones that we're presenting here today, and also other subjects that you'd like to learn a lot more detail about. So Debbie, if you can move us onto the agenda, please. Okay, so my name's Kerry Hallard. I'm the Chief Exec of the GSA. I am joined by 5 subject matter experts, which I'll very, very quickly introduce you to. So we've got Tom Bridgeford, who is a partner at Eversheds Sutherland. Tom, do a wave.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Tom's going to be covering legal rights in crisis times. Then we're moving on to GSA Chairman, Mark Devonshire, who's also VP and Head of Client Services, of Client Delivery at NTT Data Services.
Morning all.
Mark's going to be giving us an overview of partnering for the future. Then we're going to be moving on to George Gallant, who is Comms Lead EMEA for Topcoder, which has been acquired by Wipro a couple of years ago. George is going to be looking at on-demand talent and gig economy and how to supplement your workforce during this difficult time. Then we're moving on to Matthew Newfield is joining us very early in the morning from Virginia in the United States. Matt is CISO for Unisys, and he's going to be looking at the increased threat we face in a COVID-19 environment. And last, but by no means least, we've got Joe Williams, who is Supplier Governance Manager at Aviva, and he's going to be talking about the wellness of people in the workplace in incredibly stressful times. So please pose questions. Thanks, Joe. Please pose your questions. We will take them all at the end. And just a reminder to my panelists, let's try and make this slightly interactive. So obviously we all have 10 minutes to run through, but if you've got any questions of your fellow panelists, please do interact with those. So Debbie, slide down. Without further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Tom.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Debbie. Can we have the next slide? So yeah, I'm going to look at contract issues during this time of crisis and focus on 3 areas. One is sort of the main contract challenges that have been thrown up by COVID-19, some immediate and medium-term steps that everyone should be thinking about, and then I'll have a quick canter through force majeure. So in terms of what the key contract challenges are, they're really throwing up 2 competing challenges. First, customers' requirements in terms of volume and service, along with their ability to pay, is fluctuating significantly. Some customers' requirements have shot through the roof, and others are trying to ramp them back significantly. So the second competing one is that suppliers are struggling or can be struggling to perform the contract because they may have staff disruption and they may have their own supply chain and cash flow issues. So in terms of what we're seeing in the supply chain ecosystem, I think as we all know all too well, the pandemic has required huge amounts of shifts to remote working, and this has had a profound change on outsourcing providers around the world. And perhaps the starkest example of that is the Indian government's 21-day lockdown of its entire 1.3 billion population, which is causing huge logistical complexities for delivery centres across the country. Related to that is a sort of very fast moving point which varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which is where essential services are being identified and defined by governments in each location. And the Indian government has been supportive of the IT industry in this relation. So whilst the focus of attention has been initially around the physical and logical layers of security to protect customer data, the sea change of delivery is also raising a number of other concerns and considerations for customers and service providers. Obviously, security aspects are absolutely key, and I know that Matthew's going to come on and talk about those in fairly graphic and scary detail later on. But in terms of looking at contracts, it's important to ensure that work from home arrangements will meet current contractual requirements or that appropriate variations are made. And there's also a need to look at any sector-specific regulatory regimes that businesses may operate in. There is a small chink of light, I think, perhaps in that this is no doubt going to be an inflection point for the industry and could serve to look at different more flexible models moving forward, and also will no doubt speed the move to automation. So what are we seeing in terms of market? What are we seeing in the market in terms of contract challenges? Well, we've seen parties to outsourcing contracts really focus on the following. First of all, they've tried to work out what are their critical services. Are any of those required for regulatory purposes? If so, can the supplier be permitted to focus its available resource to those areas, or for the supplier to do on a location by location basis to support any mission critical service delivery? And it's important to bear in mind that jurisdictional requirements there in terms of essential services. The critical stand, looking at what your critical.
Tom, I think maybe you could turn your
video
off because the connection's not strong enough at the moment.
I will stop the video.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were saying that it's key to look at critical and then look on a location by location basis, and then essential and working out whether you can still get services to perform that. And in terms of then looking at priorities, it's also important to keep a firm eye on what your contractual obligations and so similarly, the service providers are also trying to work out what the customer's most pressing needs are, and I think it's important for service providers to be pretty frank and open about this. And then that means that there can be then a discussion around service levels and KPIs and appropriate adjustments made. And if suppliers are struggling, then in some cases customers are potentially able to provide their own additional resources, whether that network capacity or kit, and make that available. So and potentially bring some IT in-house on a temporary basis. And the other area that's obviously an area to look at is the pricing mechanisms, which are often designed for business as usual. They clearly need to be reassessed during this time. In terms of kind of immediate and medium terms that we are seeing people do, can we have the next slide, please, Debbie? And I think there's one after that, please. Oh, yeah, that one. Thanks. So I think the first thing is absolutely key is collaboration, absolutely critical. Service providers and customers, first and foremost, to be working collaboratively. Going to come on and talk a little bit about that later. So obviously there may be circumstances, and that's when you may need to more closely at your contract. First instance, an ongoing dialogue and a flat approach is key. So it's important, whilst doing that, also not to lose sight of contractual remedies, and I will talk later on about force majeure. Although I think in the first instance, finger pointing and making threats to terminate will cause more harm. The second thing to do is to make sure that you document any changes. If the service provider is seeking a waiver of contractual requirements or the customer's reprioritizing, then it's very sensible to make sure that these are properly recorded. A change control procedure, then you should follow it, and also you need to be following any gun escalation procedures. It's important, I think, that all the internal concerns should process and appropriate stakeholders, whether that's security, information security, compliance, audit, and so forth, are all appropriately involved in these processes. I think it's also possible to be aware of what we call the externalities, what's going on in the out world. So if you're moving to a work from home platform, does that impact your liability insurance coverage? Does that have an impact on audit and any particular obligations to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley in the US? And the other area, external area, obviously to be important is, to be aware of is, what are your regulators saying? And we're helping a number of trying to work their way through that particular area at the moment. The fifth point to make is that you got to move on with this, obviously, but you've got to balance the need to fast with the need to make sure that what you do is appropriately considered and the right thing. So there's a real balance there. And then finally, the area that a lot of people are now looking at quite closely is business continuity planning. I think a lot of our clients and their suppliers or customers are finding that had very detailed business continuity plans which did not cater for global down of business and people self-isolating. So there's been a huge amount of work done with a lot of people that we're working with around their BCP plans. And I think the key lessons from BCP plans are make you understand where your single points of failure are, whether that's with an employee that might potentially be hospitalized or whether you've got a key vendor. And you need a decent team of BCP on your BCP. So with a decent team of appropriate experts who can think strategically, but also implement, who can challenge the conventional views of what's probable, do appropriate drill downs on what your planning is, and where appropriate, do post-mortems. So I think BCP is a real area of focus these days. I'll just come on the final piece now, just to talk about force majeure. I know collaboration is key, but it isn't, I think, just to keep an eye on what your rights and obligations are under the contract. And interestingly, you've been invited as a firm with questions about force majeure. Everyone wondering how force majeure works, and in fact, for some clients with huge volumes, we are operating a triage service to help them work through the huge quantities of contract reviews that are needed. So the first thing to note on force majeure is that, unlike in many civil law jurisdictions, there's no implied application of force under English law. So you will only be able to get relief under force majeure if your contract has an force majeure clause, and it will therefore depend what your contract says. So it is therefore a job to be done. Therefore, a job to be done to individually analyse each contract and what each force majeure clauses say. Once, assuming you've force majeure clause, that's the first hurdle. Then you need to work out whether happening is within the definition. Some force majeure clauses will have epidemic or pandemic called out, and the World Health Organization declared that COVID-19 is a pandemic, and they declared that on the 11th of March. So in a lot of being part. The second thing, though, once worked out whether the definition, you then need to work out uh, there needs to be a causal link between the definition and that prevention before action. So to be able to show that the only reason you can't perform is because of that force majeure as defined. The requirement to mitigate all reasonable steps to mitigate, and then finally you will usually have fairly detailed notice provisions in the contract setting out so sometimes within a certain time period you've got to notify the counterparty within, say, 7 days or 21 days. It sometimes requires further information, like how are you going to address the force majeure, what steps are you taking to bring things back online, what are your mitigation steps, and also sometimes there's a requirement to do regular updates. So it's important to make sure that you follow the rules and that you follow the notice requirements in the contract to ensure that you give notice in the appropriate way. Risk of claiming force majeure incorrectly. If you claim force majeure when you were not entitled to do so, that could put yourself in breach of contract. So it's important to follow the rules and understand what your rights and obligations are under force majeure. As I said, it varies from country to country, and we have developed, which is on our coronavirus website hub. We've developed a guide in setting out the 32 different countries.
Tom, question.
Yes, hi.
How, without going into specifics or disclosing anything confidential, how many clients have actually, as a rough percentage, actually raised force majeure as a formal process?
We've quite a few. That some where been an obvious, they're obvious and they can't be closed. So that it's much easier to demonstrate that because of homework they've had to close. They've had a hard, but then got to show what mitigate. Others have sort of tried to argue part of a sort of robust discussion with their counterpart. So it's a minority said we want to rely, and most people are going down the collaboration. But we've been a lot of advice background about what the actual obligations are, so people know what the position is on the contract. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up. That's one more slide off, Debbie, I think. Oh, it looks like we've lost Mark. So I think, is it Mark next?
Yeah.
We may have lost Mark.
No, I'm here.
Oh, he's there.
No,
Right.
I'm here. Good morning, everybody. I think we're mainly European, apart from my colleague in the US, so we've got a smattering of people across the globe. Apologies for the connection. I don't know how I'm coming across, whether it was just Tom's connection.
You're good, Mark.
Okay. So that leads me on to, come on to the next slide, Debbie. And right, so I think that leads us on to just, I'm going to cover some of the best behaviours that I see across our business. So I'm responsible for delivery for all of our clients internationally within Entity Data Services. So I have people, I have staff across 5 continents, and we manage services across the globe. So every country has a different definition of key worker. Every client has a different view of prioritization, and we're working through that. And I guess also the spread of corona has clearly been different from starting in China, moving through EMEA, and now most of the globe. Not all of the globe still, actually, not all countries. But I'm going to give a picture of some of the behaviours that I see that are really examples of good practice, best practice. And I'm going to come on with my view of the next 6 months. And I think it is a personal view, although I've counseled lots of people, clients, suppliers, advisors. In terms of that, nobody can obviously predict the next 6 months, because I guess anybody on this call, if I challenge you to predict the next week, we would all probably struggle with the changing landscape. So this is just a picture. So I guess in terms of what we do see, work from home, there has been an explosion. Are we configured to work from home even today? Well, we can tell we've got connection problems. We are still struggling with moving the huge workforce of millions of people that deliver IT services across the globe to virtually all of them working from home. We in my business still have quite a lot of people actually delivering services in the US. We run and supply services to a huge sector of the healthcare business in the healthcare sector in the US and Canada, and clearly we have a lot of people on hospital sites. So we have a huge amount of people working still client side as well. By explosion that, we'll come on to security. So Matthew will cover security. All of us are looking at how do we maintain security, data integrity, particularly in BPO. How do we ensure that that is maintained? And that's a real struggle for the BPO industry. Less so in perhaps core infrastructure and app services, but certainly in BPO. The volume fluctuations that we're seeing, no contract could have ever predicted. So clearly sectors that are being more challenged, travel, hospitality, logistics, are now really ramping down operations. Banking and financial services, we're seeing increases in volumes because of increased activity, and certainly in healthcare, tech, media, and telecom, vast increases, and consumer retail clearly as well. So projects reprioritization. So interestingly, in my business, we've seen a balance of all of these things going on. So we've seen projects come forward and clients wanting to accelerate projects. So network refresh, tech refresh, security enhancements. We've seen projects put on hold, and we've seen projects still maintaining. So there's a balance of all of that. Unfortunately, we are seeing now the real significant increase in people isolating and people being affected by the virus. And as soon as clearly you get somebody identified, they've been in contact with people maybe, that closes down operations. And we're now starting to see scarce skills come through. How do we support clients? How do we get through managing mission critical services? In those industries that I've mentioned, and clearly all of industry, we're going through huge cost, but huge cash pressures as well. So responding to that. And then the last point is we've got huge technology shortages. So examples being network bandwidth, but typically networks have been over provisioned. So that's not such a bad thing, but most of our technology comes from China, and we are seeing now the lag of manufacturing closed down in China really hitting us in terms of critical services. So that's what we face. I think from my business, generally we're seeing ramping down, business as usual, and ramping up. And most of my days are spent, how do we balance everybody's requirements and businesses around focusing on the right priorities? And so it is actually, how do you leverage things from perhaps some services that aren't needed into some services that are needed? How do you manage across the geographies as well? Best behaviors that I've seen, full transparency. So that's client side and supplier side, really truly understanding the challenges, really working out how you can move resources around, really understanding what the business challenge is for that particular hour or day, because it is changing. I see true collaboration. So, we have forums every day, managing the now, the next week, and the future. Suppliers are working side by side. There's no competition involved. Everyone is pitching forward, working with client side IT, working with the business around really focusing on what can be done. And then coming back to how do you rapidly respond to some of the things that are going on. And it is around what I've seen around what is the business problem. Fortunately, I don't have any clients personally that have resorted to contract yet. It is all around what is the business problem that we're trying to achieve that day, that week, and how do we focus upon that priority, using all of the resources, be it client side, be it supply side, be it a competitor of ours to focus on that. And then I think the last point is extreme flexibility and agility. So again, coming back to my point, although Tom was talking about force majeure, the contract, I haven't got any contract in any of my clients that predicted and articulated what to do in this situation. So it is around.
Mark, can I ask you a question? How are you documenting all? Because this is presumably incredibly fast moving. You're being really flexible. How are you keeping track of because presumably you're making variations to the contract. How are you keeping strategies so that in a 6 months' time they say, well, they remember how helpful you are now, because it's all written down.
Yeah. So best and again, I've got multiple clients across the globe. So best practice is that we are documenting all of the governance that is going on. So we're tracking every meeting with proper minutes, proper actions that can then be fed back straight into procurement and contracting. And I think other scenarios where in actual fact we're having to make decisions and gather up that at the end of the week or the end of the month and then feed it back in. I think the one thing I would say, the prominent thing is the business and the operations in this situation are making the decisions involving the relevant finance, contracting, legal organisations, and clearly involving them. But it's much more about business focus rather than contract focus, in my view.
Yeah. Understandably, yeah.
So I'm supposed to only keep to 8 minutes or 10 minutes. So key things assisted by. So again, best practice. Assisted by, Kerry talked about the GSA and the standard that we have within the GSA. What the best organisations and the best way I've seen that we're getting through it is where strategic sourcing has been enabled, and it's much more of a partnership based upon value and based upon business outputs. Because the business priority is changing every hour, every day, redetermining that value and prioritising against the value is where all of the discussions are. And if we leave it at a transactional level, then we get caught in transactional discussions rather than business value. Second point is where organisations have a blended ecosystem, then they can actually leverage a lot more across the globe. And by blended, I mean in-source services, outsource services that are nearshore, onshore, offshore, services that are distributed globally, all of those, and services that are actually from smaller organisations as well as larger organisations. So once you've got a blend, you can actually use the variability in all of those services, because you cannot actually predict at any point in time what the next week is going to look like in terms of the pain that's being suffered. Tom talked around DR and BCP. I would probably say that about 10%, maybe 20% have comprehensive BCP plans that we've managed to use as a foundation to guide us. So clearly, a lot of the BCP planning is now being done in a reactive basis that we're finding. Organisations that have truly encompassed cloud and virtualisation are actually managing to flex their resource models quite significantly. And the last point is those organisations that have put in place digital architectures, be they a digital worker or complete digital architectures enabling retailing, e-commerce, B2B commerce, are absolutely winning in this current times. So that's what I see in terms of current times. Looking at the next 6 months, next slide.
Mark, can you do this one really quickly, because keeping an eye on time.
Sorry, I always talk too much, sorry. Stabilisation, so we are still in stabilisation mode. So all of those people we've moved to delivering services, that needs to solidify. We need to increase security, data integrity, and then we need to move to the new norm. So we don't know what the new norm is, but it will certainly involve lots more people working from home. It will certainly involve a cashless society. It will certainly involve much more risk planning and a digital economy. So certainly that we will see sourcing move from being reacting to current, how do we manage current scenarios to restart procurement in a much more agile manner. We are going to see when services come back and when industries come back to some sort of level of business normality, there will be an increased investment required in terms, or prioritization, should I say, in terms of security, digital work, digital everything. 5G will become much more relevant in terms of delivering out its business cases, certainly cloud and certainly AI. We will see much more right shoring. I'll come back to that blended ecosystem. So I think there will be a lot more insourcing, but at the same time, I think that will be blended by a lot more outsourcing where organizations. So I think overall, the industry will stay about the same in terms of level of insourcing and outsourcing, but companies will make a conscious decision and will change that. And we'll also find a lot more country decisions around where should services be delivered from, and a lot more consideration around follow the sun delivery and truly distributing service delivery. Clearly, lessons learned. So in the current climate, things are going well in a lot of spaces, but things aren't going so well in a lot of other areas, and it is going to be tough in the next few weeks and months. And there will be supplier rationalization. There will be ongoing views around who has supported, who has partnered, who has exhibited the right behaviours, and that will go forward in terms of delivery. And then the last point is, clearly we are going to head into and are already day to day fighting with huge cost pressures, and a significant amount of the clients are suffering huge difficulties, and therefore how do we work through that over the next few months in terms of support, all of us together as an ecosystem. But as we come back, we are going to have to look at the next level of transformation within our industry, and that will be truly encompassing automation enterprise. It will be truly mapping cloud and unit-based services across the business, and it will be proper shared services and less dedicated services. Sorry, right. I overran.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we do need to move on. That was all very interesting and bang on. But now we're going to move over to you, George, and look at how the community can perhaps look to on-demand talent to fill some gaps.
Thanks, Gary. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Right shoring, follow the sun, probably a really nice segue into throwing a different model. The model being Top Coder. We're a organization who builds digital assets, and we work from home. We have a work from home model. We have crowdsourcing, gig economy, scalability, and we're very busy right now. We're part of an organization called Wipro, who have 180,000 engineers, so very similar challenges to NTT, to Mark. And obviously we're going to be looking at GSA best practices moving forward and what our world looks like. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about the crowdsourcing model, the gig economy model. As I say, we're very, very in demand and busy at the moment with the current pandemic. I'll talk a little bit about the passion economy, how we built the crowdsourcing community. I'll talk about why the model works, how the model works, and I'll talk a little bit about remote working challenges, the challenges we face as Top Coder employees, but also our community face working from home. A little bit about business as usual, and then I'll open up for questions. Next slide, please, Debbie. So the platform started many years ago. A group of engineers thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could find the right skills right now? It was as simple as that. And these people, our community, are home workers. Mentioned earlier, sometimes known as the gig economy, we call them the passion economy. And to build that community, at the time we were thinking, how do we get people onto the platform? How do we keep that community moving, and how do we grow that community? As you can see, it grows 10,000 people per month now, and is currently at 1.6 million people as from last week. So the key areas we looked at to build the community were money. You have to pay people. People have bills to pay. The one that was really interesting was we found that it was about passion, it was about having fun things to do. And what we realized quite quickly into growing the platform, that ratings and rankings and fun and passion drove behavior as much, if not more, than money. Next slide, please, Debbie. And so in terms of engaging our community and engaging them to deliver, you know, what's the process? The process that we find, the secret sauce for us, is the atomization process, which is carried out by a member of the community who we call a co-pilot, this cool guy in the picture. And essentially we analyze a problem, we break it into smaller problems, and we point those problems to groups of people into the community. So it's back to passion. It's back to being able to pinpoint the right people who are passionate about solving that problem, who can opt in to deliver that contest, that competition, that piece of the pie. And the co-pilot will put all of the pieces of the pie back together and into a digital solution and deliver that back to the customer, and will transfer the intellectual property across the customer. So that's kind of how it works. Next slide, please, Debbie. The cool thing about this model, what we have found over the years, is the speed of getting things done, getting stuff done. And as you can imagine, in the current times, people are very quickly shifting their focus and efforts as to what they should accelerate, which, like Mark touched on earlier, which projects do we accelerate? We're finding digital assets, and we can deliver those really, really quickly. And that speed comes from being able to dial up those 1.6 million people, or groups of communities within the 1.6 million people, and ramp them up really quickly. So we can ramp up a team within 24 hours, but also the speed of getting stuff done. The atomization process enables us to run parallel work streams and pull that project back much quicker. So the productivity 3x, we would say, is pretty conservative. And then the quality is guaranteed because the people are opting in, the community members are opting in, and we pay for results, not hours worked. Next slide, please, David. For people who want to leverage the community, to leverage the best of the best out there in the world, across the globe, there is an alternative model where we can help people augment members of our community. So we would all augment them in the same way as you would, contractors, for example. The key difference being the rankings, the ratings. So next slide, please. And as I said, everybody works from home. We work from home at Top Coder. The community all work from home. And the key things, the key challenges from the home-based model is, from an organization, from a WIPRO standpoint, or NTT, or whatever, UNICEF, whatever organization you work for, you've got to have that trust. So you've got to have the right leadership. You've got to have transparency. Mark touched on transparency earlier. So often our leaders at Top Coder will say, it's fine to take your kids to the park. It's absolutely fine to do the school run. But it's got to be transparent. It's got to be in your diary, and we will know not to call you at that time. No issues whatsoever. And with that becomes discipline. Discipline can be a tough one in the sense that you can work too long hours unless you have discipline. So our community members have to have a work-life balance. They've opted into this lifestyle. They've opted into the gig model. They have to make sure that they do spend time with their family. And what we're able to do with our the process of crowdsourcing is have them build their life around what they do. So you've got to have discipline, tools and policies. So Tom and Matt, Tom has touched on these, Matt's going to touch on these, but we're all calling out, do your policies support home working? It just, I've seen risk assessments in the past where force majeure subjects like tsunami have come up, and the impact of a tsunami for a company on the south coast of England is so catastrophic. You've got to look at the likelihood of it happening over the impact of if it happened in terms of risk assessment. Nobody, when we were looking at things like that, would have seen the 2-meter rule. Nobody would have heard of self-isolation at that point. Or certainly if they had, or if people who understood worldwide pandemics would probably give the same odds, if not more, as a tsunami happening. So I guess, going back to those policies, going back to do they support the technology that's available right now, the work from home model, the bring your own device model? Next slide, please, Debbie. And then business as usual. And everybody at Top Coder, the leadership, we had all hands, as I can imagine everybody has with their companies and their leaders in the past difficult 2 weeks. And our leadership said 3 things. Number 1, get your house in order. If you need to take time, if you need to spend time with your family, make sure everybody's okay. That is our number 1 priority, because we need you to be okay to do number 2, which is get out there and help our customers, get out there and help Wipro, get out there and help Wipro customers and our customers to adopt to this model of being able to scale really, really quickly and build assets really, really quickly. And then, of course, help anyone. And, we are available all the time to discuss remote working, home models, or how you would scale using crowd and community. So I'm gonna pause there for any questions. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Right, there is one question actually here for you. So clearly a great example of successfully remote working. How reliant is this on the tech platform for distribution and management of work? George.
I'm not sure I understood the question. How reliant is the model? I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, how reliant is it on the tech platform?
Well, I think the answer is in the results. So we have a 96% fulfillment rate, which in a traditional model I probably couldn't get if my life depended on it. And the technology that underpins that and the home working model is what drives, and the competitions is what drives that success and drives that behavior. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Right, interesting time. Let's move on. So I think that question segues quite nicely into our next speaker as well. So Matt, over to you to talk about cybersecurity and increased threats in a COVID-19 environment, please.
All right, well, thank you very much, and hello everybody. I will do my best not to be the scary cyber guy during this conversation, but I wanted to bring up a few key points as we are seeing corporations around the world move to a work from home model. Even in our own corporation, we went from about a 13 to 15% work from home to 93% work from home in under a week, and that raises a lot of concerns. What I want to cover, and I have no slides on this, so it's just a conversation, are where we're seeing some significant upticks in attacks, then what people can be doing about it. What I think corporations and the people who work for them need to really focus on are 3 areas of attack cycles we're seeing a significant increase in. The first is phishing. Not only corporate email phishing, but we're seeing the personal phishing attacks really start to skyrocket as people use platforms like LinkedIn, for example, and they've exposed what companies they work for, what their leadership looks like, and sometimes even their corporate email addresses. We're seeing a lot of the spear phishing concepts come to people's personal accounts and to their work accounts as well, but the personal accounts are what's concerning to us. A lot of our employees have been in an experience where if they got a strange email from their boss or from their CEO, they may have been able to walk down a hallway to ask a question, to be able to have a discussion with that person to see, did you really do that? And what the adversaries are starting to realize is you don't have that opportunity anymore. Most likely you're not anywhere near that person. You may not even be in the same time zone anymore, as a lot of people have gone to shelter in place and have left the regions they actually work in. On top of phishing, we're also seeing a significant uptick in vishing, which is voice phishing, where people are getting phone calls claiming to be from service desks, help desks of the corporations they work for, looking for password changes, looking for information that they can use to compromise the businesses they work for. So how do you fix all this? What you've heard so far today and what you will continue to hear is communication. You have to make sure you do not stop communicating with your employees. You do not stop any testing or education programs you have with your employees. Even though people are home, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, you cannot stop the basics. The other thing we're seeing a huge uptick in is home IP address attacks. Many people are now working from home, and one of the interesting things that we've seen is that a lot of people have home internet providers, and I ask this a lot when I have open panels and I can see everybody's face. You know, how many people on this call of the 82 people here had someone come into their home, install some equipment, show them that everything worked, including your television? You smiled and waved goodbye and you thought everything was great. And the answer is most people. How many people have gone through and actually hardened the devices that were left behind, changed your default passwords, made sure they were not accessible from outside of the home that you live in? And the answer, unfortunately, is not many. And that should scare us, because we've now given equipment for people to work from home without thinking that they are now on a network that may have been compromised a long time ago or may be compromised sometime soon. So how do you address that as a company? Again, through communication, sending out notation of, if you're working from home, you know the region, you know the major providers in the region and what kind of equipment they're using. Offer them guidance, offer a help desk to say, if you've got certain piece of equipment, call into our help desk and we will help you secure that. Send them links to those providers so that they can go in and start securing the equipment within their home. You've also heard things about policy and procedure. Now's the time to really make sure that you've evaluated your policies and procedures so that things like system sharing. A lot of people are getting equipment that may be better than their personal equipment. They're now sheltering in place with their siblings, with their children, with their spouses, and with their friends. And they may think, wow, I have a better laptop or desktop that the company's provided me than the one I actually own. Well, are they allowed to share that with their friends and family? Are they allowed to use that for their personal use? Are they allowed to install things on those devices? If the answer is no, are the employees that are working from home aware that that's the case? If not, you need to make them aware. You don't need to scare them, but you need to make sure you're communicating the policies and the procedures that you have in your corporation clearly, effectively, and continually throughout this pandemic, but in general throughout their employment time. These are some major areas of concern. I've also seen a significant uptick in, unfortunately, knee-jerk reactions to the work from home. I've actually talked to some companies who are literally buying equipment from big box stores and online retailers, not doing anything to those systems and sending them to home users with instructions. I highly recommend you do not do that. Companies need to understand the decisions they make today will seed their futures, and with a cybersecurity, they will not like what grows. Adversaries right now are being inundated with information that they cannot use today because the amount of it is too great. Things that are happening today you will not see in the news for 120 to 180 days. That's when a lot of the problems that we're causing today as a society for this work from home will really start showing itself. And finally, you have to really look at the technologies that you're utilizing for your work from home. The technologies of yesterday are not designed for where we are today. If you think about most remote access VPN infrastructures, they were really designed for, you know, that 15 to 20, maximum 25% of your workforce work from home. That includes the hardware that was used, that includes the software license for concurrency, how many people are able to access your infrastructure and your assets. And a lot of people, a lot of corporations, a lot of CIOs never looked at anything different. Even though you may not want to change today, even though you may not have the capability to change today, now's the time to start having those conversations. Software-defined networking and software-defined perimeters are the new norm. If you are not doing that, you are going to have problems in the future. If anybody, in my opinion, believes we're going to go back to 15% work from home, as we were talking about in this chat, I don't think you're correct. You're going to see a lot of companies decide, wow, we were successful with this work from home. We're going to increase our continued capabilities. But if they use the policies and procedures that they had when this pandemic occurred, they will see major, major breaches. And that's regulated and non-regulated companies. And I'll even throw one further. Those are government agencies. Don't think the governments around the world, both local, federal, state, are not dealing with these same problems. Software-defined network, software-defined perimeters are going to be, again, the new norm. And then, finally, it's monitoring. A lot of people, if you think about your VPN, it was expanding of the four walls. Now I don't have a perimeter anymore. The new perimeter is really two things. It's the laptop we're sitting on, and I just shook mine, and your identity. That's the new perimeter that we need to start thinking about. And how are we monitoring that? How are we making sure we know what's going on, not only by the asset provided, but by the identity of that asset and the user behind it? And we have to start thinking much, much differently, right? With all of the privacy concerns we have around the world, we have them in the US, you have them throughout Europe, obviously, in most major countries that I work in, we deal with privacy as well. So how are you going to deal with that identity-based concept moving forward? I know we're short on time, so I'm going to end. But again, if I can leave everybody here, which is a few main points, it's communications. Remember, there's a human being behind the computer. We all make mistakes, but what you do not want to do is leave it in the hands of someone who doesn't know to make the decision. Provide your employees the data they need to operate securely, and then hold them accountable. That is a good thing. We all want to know. We all want to do the right thing. Maybe not all, but most of us at least want to know. Up your monitoring. You have to be monitoring. And monitoring is not just technology, but ask your CISO, ask your CIO, ask those people, for a report on a day-to-day basis. What are people doing? What are they seeing? Work with your partners on threats. If you do not have an intel or threat team within your organization, start partnering with companies that have them. Start looking at services that provide them. I have a threat intelligence team that reports to me. I meet with them twice a day, 7 days a week. 7 days a week. It's that important. I need to know at the drop of a dime if there's a targeted threat, not only against our corporation, but our clients as well as our leadership. So it's very, very important for us. And obviously with that, I say to everybody, please be safe. I will hand it off to the next so that we can talk about our users.
Yeah,
thank you all.
Just a couple of quick questions for you before we do that. Really, really fast answers. So I've got a question in from Matt Sims that is actually, I think, basically asking, do you think the regulators are going to be turning a blind eye to fining people when things go terribly wrong in this big no?
I do not believe so. I actually think you will see regulators and you will see agencies stepping up their game, because this is a test on corporations' preparedness. There is no better test than what's going on today. And those that succeed, I think you can have a really good marketing differentiator, and we talked about that in chat, and those that fail will suffer.
Okay, thank you. And the other one is from Lauren Tennant. I guess as well as moving from traditional VPN to SDN technology, this will save huge costs for businesses as well as enabling capacity right now.
Absolutely. I mean, again, and this isn't a plug for my company. Like I said, we went from about that 13 to 15% to 93%. We actually did it in 48 hours, no additional costs, no additional infrastructure, no negative experience to our associates. And a lot of these are people who've never worked from home. And we did this through our software-defined perimeter capabilities, point-to-point capabilities that we have as a company we sell, but also that we utilize, as well as VDI infrastructure without relying on traditional VPN. We actually don't even have that.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks for answering those. Right, yes, Joe, Williams, thank you for being so patient. Just so everybody on the webinar knows, this webinar can run until 12:30. So we will keep going. It won't suddenly stop, but we are going to try and keep it condensed. So Joe, over to you about people and wellness in the workplace, please.
Thank you, Kerry. And I will leave my video off for networking reasons. So what I'm going to talk about today follows on very well from all of the presentations we've had so far. With the current climate we're seeing across the globe, we have more people working remotely in response to the COVID-19 pandemic than we ever had before. There are a multitude of challenges, and we've discussed a number relating to the capacity to work remotely, the security impacts of doing so. And these are both areas which have no doubt been the primary focus across most of our organisations. But what I want to talk about is a third element to this, which is managing the well-being of our people during these times. It's a subject that is particularly close to my heart, and one that we at Aviva have taken incredibly seriously, both pre and during the current COVID-19 crisis. If we could have the next slide, please, Debbie. Okay, so well-being in the workplace. What should organisations be doing now? I'm going to caveat this immediately by saying there is no one right answer or approach to ensuring well-being across our people and organisations. We all work in different sectors, we work for different companies of different sizes, with different people, and we all have different capacities to support home working. I also won't patronise you by pulling out the requirements to make sure that we're ensuring staff wages and roles are secured. As important and as obvious as that may seem, though, I think we're all aware of some very high-profile companies who, over the past few weeks, maybe haven't covered themselves in glory on this front. And I'm sure that over time that those companies will see the negative side to how they've treated their employees. I do really like the terminology that George used about getting your house in order, which is why I've stolen it and used it in my own slide. I think that's the primary thing we need to do to make sure that we can ensure the well-being of our employees in this time, making sure that where possible, our staff have the ability and the capacity to work from home. And following on from what Matt said, ensuring that we have a continuity of data and information security during what is an incredibly optimal time for hackers and grifters. The area that I consider to be most important with well-being is constant communication. We need to make sure that everyone who is now working remotely is aware of the basics. This can be things such as understanding the working from home policies and procedures. We need to make sure that people aren't out of sight, out of mind. We need to be keeping in touch with our people on as regular basis as possible. It's also crucial to remember, though, that not everybody has the capacity to work from home, and that we've had certain people in parts of our organisations who, over the past couple of weeks, have been going way above and beyond what is expected of an individual employee, and doing that has actually allowed the number of people we've had working from home to do so. And it is absolutely paramount that those people are recognised for the effort being made at times like these. Have the next slide, please, Debbie. Okay, so dealing with new distractions and opportunities. For people used to working from home 5 days a week to those doing it for the first time, we are all waking up to a new world full of new distractions and new opportunities, both on a personal and professional basis. I'm sure many of you who've been working from home will be familiar with the Demon Man on the right-hand side of the slide, responsible for many an ache and pain over the last 2 weeks. Across our businesses, we all have people with different well-being needs, and the most important thing is to recognise this, both in the short term and the long term. For example, not everybody has a suitable working from home setup. We have some people who are working from sofas or kitchen tables at the moment rather than a home office. And from a physical and mental perspective, this is not something that is sustainable in the long term. There may not be a huge amount we can influence right now, but when we are looking longer term, if we as companies are looking to move to a much more remote-based workforce, these are really important factors to people's well-being that we do need to consider. At the moment as well, most of us are surrounded by dogs, cats, children's wives, husbands or partners, And I'm sure many of us have had the odd BBC dad moments, and I'm sure we'll all be dealing with this in different ways. Some of us will be popping our kids on our laps, others shooing them out the door. Again, there is absolutely no right or wrong way of dealing with this, but for me, the key to managing this well is to provide constant and assured communications to our people. Make them aware that these mini interruptions are okay. Make them aware that this is happening to people far and wide, and it will help them to manage the situations. And talking on a personal note, I actually think that seeing other people's children or cats and dogs up on screens can often be the highlight of my working day. So I personally would very much encourage you to get your kids and cats and dogs involved as and when they do jump into the picture.
Just do it
Secondly,
securely.
yes, absolutely. Although I think on the cats and dog side, the security is okay, and maybe not so much on the children's side. Secondly, for people who are working from home with children at the moment, it's key to make sure that we are encouraging flexible working patterns where possible. Encouraging people to do some Joe Wicks with the kids in the morning, or as it's become in my house, me doing Joe Wicks while the kids sit on the sofa after 5 minutes of effort is a good thing. We need to encourage people to take breaks, spend some time with your children, go outside for 5 minutes, kick a football around with them, sit with them and do some homeschooling. We're working in an almost unique time. So we as organisations need to be working with our people to give them as much flexibility as possible. Most importantly, though, making sure that everyone is getting the interaction they need. Not everybody is a comfortable home worker, and we will have a lot of people across our organisations who are missing that human interaction of being in an office. So where possible, we need to spend as much time with our people, making sure that they're getting the well-being they need. The next slide, please, Debbie. So the future, what could it look like? Mark and George and Matt have all gone into some good detail on this. The truth of the matter is that enforced home working at the moment is showing us all a lot of positives and negatives about home working. I'm not going to go into those elements too much because I want to focus on well-being. But the simple truth is that after this extended period of enforced home working, it is incredibly unlikely we will go back to how things were only a few weeks ago. No one can know for sure how this way of working will look in the future, but one thing we can be sure of is that all of our finance departments will be keen to look at the cost savings that are delivered as a result of travel clampdowns we have at the moment and increased home working. Just click through again, please, Debbie. And we all may see a completely different working map to our lives as we see on the slide now. And the next slide, please, Debbie. But the big question I have is, whilst all of our finance departments will be very much looking with a keen eye on the cost savings, how many of our companies are planning on marrying this with a well-being review? It's something that I would absolutely urge everybody to make sure is done hand in hand with any cost review. And here at the GSA, we're committed to supporting our member base on this front. We will shortly be commencing with a sourcing industry-wide piece of research into the well-being impacts of the current COVID-19 pandemic. We aim to consider all possible factors on well-being, and we'll be looking for your support in undertaking an initial piece of research across your organisations, completed anonymously, aimed at pulling together as much data as we can, from which we will provide a well-being report to you in due course.
Can I ask you a quick question on well-being? One of the things that I'm starting to see a lot of people doing virtual lunches, virtual happy hours, virtual breakfasts. What are your thoughts on those? Doing something like the videos you see now, bringing teams together just while they eat lunch.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think anything that we can do to improve the communication of our people is always going to be a good thing. And like I said, when we look at well-being, it's a very, very individual thing. We have certain people who, like myself, are more on the cat side, who quite happy to be sat alone for kind of 7-8 hours a day, eat on my own, go out for a jog. But we all know people who are more on the dog side, who want to be in and around people. And I would just urge anybody as people managers or just as people in general to make sure that you are reaching out having these face-to-face discussions virtually with people. And yeah, if you want to go down the route of having virtual lunches, I think that's a brilliant idea.
Great.
Thank you. And there we are. Hopefully I was under the 10 minutes.
No, that was brilliant, Joe. Thank you. So we had quite a lot of chat on the webinar chat, and I've also got some questions that have come on into my email and text box, really looking at this subject. So I just want to ask the panelists, you know, how many of you think that this is really going to go back to the way it was before? And what do you think are going to be the most dramatic permanent changes? So a lot of the questions I had were pertaining specifically to the customer service industry and the physical call center. But answer from your broader perspectives, please.
I'll have a go. I think I was hearing some stories last week. Obviously, the company that own Topcoder do a lot of business process outsourcing. They manage call centers, so they've learned pretty quickly how to move a call center into somebody's house. And I think we all agree that's not going to happen after the pandemic. We're not going to move call centers into people's houses, but we physically had to do it. I heard stories of one team only being able to get a certain amount of servers out the room, so they had to really scale up really quickly. I think we'll take an element of that into the future. I think we will learn from what's happened in the last 2 weeks, and you know, models will change. But yeah.
Okay.
But Kerry, just so I guess a challenge, and I think the majority on this call are probably sitting in nice surroundings in studies or facilities at home. I think I mean, definitely the way that we work will change. The hours, the work-life balance will suddenly become prevalent, and working from home. However, there are, you know, our industry is huge, be it BPO, be it IT services. Our industry is huge, and we have a lot of people currently delivering services from, you know, sitting there in perhaps their living rooms with you know, children around that they're trying to balance and juggle, and I think that's a bigger challenge. The majority of our workforces actually aren't physically and environmentally set up to work from home, and how do we get that balance and help that, and what is the, I guess, the professional code of conduct in terms of working from home, and what does that look like? So I think, you know, that's the reality of our industry, but it certainly will happen, but we just need to be cognizant of it is difficult for quite the majority of our workforce to work from home.
Yeah, and it also depends on the region. As you noted, there are a lot of regions. You talk about space, you talk about location, but you know, there could be internet problems. Not every place that we have employees have stable internet or have high-speed internet at all, and a lot of that is a concern. We have certain employees that live in regions where air conditioning is not the norm in their homes, or heat is not, you know, to what you would expect inside of an office facility. And that makes things very difficult for people to be there all day, every day, especially if you have large households. So there absolutely has to be a balance, as we're talking about in this chat. You know, but we need to be careful and make sure there's the two-way communications. If you're a leader in your organization, if you're an employee of your organization, you need to be communicating that back into the company, because if you leave it to someone who's looking at a spreadsheet only, we could be left in a situation that is not great for everybody, except for the dog, of course. Mark, it's a great dog. But you could be left in a very bad situation where you negatively impact a workforce that you didn't mean to intentionally do that to.
Okay, I've got a completely different subject matter question coming on in now, and that is some of the service providers are asking their employees to take pay cuts. Have you guys heard that going on here?
Yep. Yeah, we've seen a lot of organizations that we deal with that are trying to not do full furloughs or layoffs, and instead are asking to try to do some pay reductions across the board to save for the greater good, to save other people's jobs, since the job market, if you were removed from your organization, depending on your severance, would be very difficult to become reemployed or gainfully employed in the near term. In the United States, we're seeing massive unemployment, like we are everywhere in the services industry. So a lot of companies are talking to their employees about that we're seeing.
Okay, that's the US picture. What are we seeing in the UK?
Sorry, no, go.
George,
I heard a really cool story, if I may. Last week, a relative of mine works for a software company in the hospitality industry. And of course, the hospitality industry has been one of the hardest hits in the past 2 weeks. And they volunteered a pay cut. The platform is funded. It's a startup, but it's funded, and it's not in any immediate danger. But all of the staff just jumped in and offered a pay cut. And then not only did they offer a pay cut, but they set up a new platform extension to the platform, a new front end to the platform, to move people from hospitality into retail for free. But they were all good at their processes, all good at recruitment. So not only did they offer a pay cut, their employer has just completely changed their model, and they're taking people out of the industry where they belong and putting them in retail. I think behavior like that is gonna pay them back in dividends in the future, big time.
Okay. So another question that's come on in, a completely different subject again, is offshoring, and whether this could be the demise of offshoring, and particularly the demise of India as being the hub for UK and US offshoring delivery.
So I don't think that personally. Coming back to my point, I think there will be a lot of discussions around what is the right balance, onshore, nearshore, offshore, insource versus outsource, automate versus labour. I think all of those discussions are prevalent. Clearly the capability that we need going forwards is still significant in India, and therefore, when we start investing again, we do need skills. If we've got those skills in country, then clearly, and we've invested in skills in country, then that may be an applicable discussion. I think the risk balance clearly is also the discussion around, which is probably for every organisation. We consolidated services in centres, single or double centres or triple at best, and therefore actually looking at that going forwards and driving that and working out what is sensible. And the last thing is, of course, currency fluctuation is huge at the moment, and it currently favours the market. So there's huge economic plays as well in terms of what it looks like going forward. But I think there will be huge change, and I think there will be huge changes for India, but I don't see it being demise necessarily. But I may have a different view from everybody else.
No, I don't disagree. We're starting to hear a lot of chatter and conversations about, at least in my industry, it's not the offshoring conversation, it's the outsourcing conversation. Do you continue to outsource when you have your own employees or associates that you have to make decisions about? Would you rather keep an outsourcing contract, or force majeure, as we talked about, or canceling that contract to be able to give that work to people that are full-time employees of your corporation that may have been impacted? So we're starting to hear that kind of chatter more than offshore in nearshore kind of things, especially for global companies.
Okay, thank you. Right, I can see more conversation come on in, but for now, Debbie, could you move on to the next slide, please? So So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what the GSA is going to be doing in a COVID and post-COVID environment. So we absolutely do believe that companies are, and actively already are, but will do in the future, review their approach to strategic sourcing. And the whole approach to sourcing models is going to become ever more complex. I think companies are, as Mark said, going to be looking at their shoring strategies, their in-sourcing, their outsourcing, and their sourcing ecosystems. And I think they're going to become a lot more a lot more complex. So actually understanding how to do sourcing, strategic sourcing correctly is going to become paramount. So the GSA is going to be making the global sourcing standard, which is its approach to best practice in strategic sourcing, freely available, not just to our membership community, but to the broader industry, so that we can give guidance to the broader community on how to reevaluate their strategic sourcing, to ensure that they actually do their strategic sourcing now to industry verified best practice. So, so that's one key area of work, and we're going to be distilling that information through free online tutorials to the community as well. We certainly believe there's going to be a big drive towards digital workers, and we're going to be helping our members and the community with guidance on how they can move and increase their use of digital workers, but not in a knee-jerk reaction. Our programme was always really focused in 2020 on how to strategically move towards enterprise-wide automation. We are going to be increasing the speed of disseminating that information to help our members through this time and get that working much more smoothly, but in a robust, non-knee-jerk way. So we are, with the help of our friends at Evershed Sutherlands and the broader legal community, going to be giving guidelines on the new operating models and how you actually contract for those. I'm going to continuing all our work on upskilling talent in the industry, and that will be by disseminating a lot more information about all the new techs that are coming down the line and how to source those techs and how to embed those techs in your sourcing arrangements, but also, as I said, the ongoing best practice guidance on strategic sourcing. A new program, hashtag Never Stop Selling. We are going to be helping our membership community look at how to continue selling and generating leads so that they have a business continuity moving forward. So it's a new program that the GSA will be introducing to our members. And I think most importantly, and as most of the chat that has actually come on through has been focused on the wellness of people. So as Joe has articulated, we will be doing a major study for looking at the wellness of people, those working in the home and those that then do go back to work in the workplace, and assess what is the right balance there. So so obviously all of our programs will be delivered in an online environment. We're continuing with our awards. We've got our professional awards open at the moment. We believe that even though we're in a lockdown, we shouldn't stop celebrating the best practice, the talent of our individuals, the talent of our teams, and the great work that the industry does. So we're going to continue with programs like that to make sure that we do recognise what this industry does and the value that it adds and the value that our people deliver. So that's a bit of an overview. Mark, is there anything else you want to add as to what the GSA's response is?
Well, no, just for all the people on this call, thank you for joining. What we have set up under Kerry's leadership is a number of work streams, as she's mentioned. We would love people to become part of those work streams. It is an association. The ideas come from our members, and the change comes from the membership base that the GSA has. So I just urge, if you are interested in working with us, enabling change, making change happen, then you know, we've got an exciting agenda for this year. It hasn't changed. It's changed a bit in terms of the format, but in actual fact, it's largely what we were trying to do anyway. So it's, you know, I guess all of this change is exciting, and hopefully we will come out of it quickly. And a lot of our members are going through a huge change and huge pain and difficulty, but we all need to be positive about the future, and what the future holds. You know, the fact is that in terms of any pandemic that has happened in the past, there has been a huge bounce back, and stock markets and economies have bounced back. So that's what we have to use as the evidence for future prosperity. And just, you know, please do feedback to Kerry or myself if you do want to get involved. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So I'd like to pull this to a close. There is more chat going on, and I think probably a few of the speakers can stay on and carry on the conversation. But for those that need to now drop off, I would like to say thank you very much to all of our panelists. A special big thank you to Matt, because it was incredibly early that he had to get out of bed this morning in Virginia to make this. I would like to also ask that participants let us know what else they'd like to see from the GSA, and whether they'd like any of these subject matters to be investigated in a much more in-depth level, and we'd be more than happy to put on additional webinars if that was the requirement. So so I'd like to say thank you, stay safe and stay sane if you possibly can, and look forward to speaking to you all again soon. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.